I of course would like to thank our first speakers that will recall back into the game when we go to the Q&A, and move to the second panel today, where we have the opportunity, in fact, to listen from the regions, or at least from those that are on the ground, and of course can also therefore bring to us a bit of a view on how they see these long-term trends, and then the COVID crisis and disruptions impacting differently their region, as well as, of course, other regions in their countries. We have again quite of a differentiated panel, which help to see whether these the views and on opportunities and risk differ. I would like to start from the US, Sandy, and get a view from you about whether from Detroit the risk and opportunity that just described are perceived as such. For instance, David has highlighted opportunities that may come for European regions from reshoring. Is that the case also that you see for the US and Detroit in particular, and how you see the region placed in the race towards electric vehicles and other technological changes? Sandy.
Great. Lucia, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with my OECD friends. I'm delighted to share a North American perspective, specifically the perspective of the Detroit region. Certainly, while our regional economy has diversified over the last 25 years, especially the city of Detroit itself, the automotive and mobility sectors remain our most valuable regional industry. So when we look at how COVID has impacted the industry, I think some of the key buckets, and David had actually already mentioned several of these. One is mobility as a service. When we look at how COVID is likely to impact, or the ongoing impacts of our COVID experience, I should say, is, at least in North America, short term, we're certainly seeing the use and acceptance of mobility as a service, exemplified by firms like Uber, certainly suffering as health concerns of any shared item or any shared space remains high, as the virus still remains, I would say, untamed in the US compared to some of our fellow industrialized countries. What is unknown, however, is what is the long-lasting impact of this behavioral pattern? Will people demand less mobility as a service as time goes on because of this COVID experience? Medium and long term, though, perhaps more important, is how investment flows into mobility as a service are likely to be affected. Again, as referenced earlier in our panel discussion, traditional automotive firms are going to have to reevaluate and are reevaluating their investment spending as their margins are compressed quite dramatically and increased as the COVID experience has dramatically increased their costs, and at least in the United States, fairly dramatically decreased their volume. Also, long term, again, North American perspective, if the COVID crisis shifts people's thinking regarding where they live. There's obviously been a global flight to cities across the globe, but will the COVID experience push people away from central cities into more suburban communities because of their ability to work at home, their employer offering them more flexibility, this global experience of all of us using Zoom and Teams and GoToWebinar to do our work? Will that then decrease mobility as a service and then increase potentially the purchase of individual vehicles? I think for autonomous vehicle development, I think some of these same developments regarding mobility as a service play here too, especially the compression of the of the finances of traditional automotive companies. Their ability to spend on AV investments is definitely going to be compressed, as the payoff is much more unlikely, or at least much more uncertain, and certainly longer term, and they have to focus more on today. However, non-automotive firms in the autonomous vehicle space are likely to flourish as the demand for automated things, including trucks and industrial equipment, will likely spike quite dramatically coming out of COVID, and I expect to see those firms to do very well. Conventional vehicle sales, I'll just say, give a couple North American points. There's lots of interesting dynamics here. Up until COVID, US light vehicle sales were roughly 17 million units. We had been at that level for about 5 or 6 years, considered a very strong market. Our companies were doing very, very well. However, this was the level of about 15 years ago. And given the US population growth over the last 20 years, you would expect that 17 million to be even higher. So even without COVID, our US light vehicle sales was not keeping pace with inflation. COVID is going to push US vehicle sales from 17 million to about 13 million, roughly a 20 to 25% reduction. And our current forecasts only have us back up to about 16 million 4 to 5 years out. So this recovery will not be quick. Interestingly, however, the 2020 sales forecasts have continually been revised upwards since April. We have seen much stronger demand for vehicle sales than we had expected. That number keeps coming up. And in the US, we certainly have some supply issues, labor supply issues certainly in the short term. We don't know how long that's going to last. And perhaps when we get into the question and answer period, we can talk about global supply chains. Barbara mentioned some of these issues, and the EV market obviously in the US is very different than it is in Europe, certainly different than it is in China, but we can certainly talk about the North American experience regarding EVs. So Lucia, back to you. Thank you. Lucia, you're on.
Sandy. Thank you, Sandy. May I just ask you to, if you can elaborate in a couple of minutes on the labor supply challenges that you see?
What North American-based firms, or particularly US-based manufacturing, is experiencing a labor shortage that is quite significant, driven by 3 factors. One, since COVID is still, again, relatively untamed in the US, workers are hesitant to go back to work. That's factor 1. Factor 2 is, like many other nations across the globe, the US offered enhanced unemployment benefits. While those have been expiring in recent weeks, the financial incentive to actually stay at home, especially for lower paid manufacturing workers, was very strong. You could actually make more staying at home than going to work. That has been a very big political issue in the business community in the United States. And the third factor is, since demand for light vehicle sales, especially profitable vehicles like pickup trucks and crossover vehicles and sport utility vehicles, has been very, very high, much higher than expected. The plants, the supply lines have been running really at full capacity, and the existing workforce that did come back is getting very burned out. Those are the 3 factors we're facing.
Thank you very much.